Welcome to another episode of Unpublic with Citizen Stewart, and today is the Freedom Friday edition with Sharif El Mekki, my brother. It is Friday, and you are still not free, but hopefully you are freer after an hour of spending some time with us in this discussion. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about the importance of art and creative people and creatives in the civil rights movement or in freedom struggles, the Black struggle. In the United States and beyond. I have a couple of examples that I wanted to bring up quickly to set us up. But before I do, I will say good morning, Brother Sharif.
Hey, man. Good morning. Happy Friday to you. Great to see you. And, just love this topic of creative people, the artists, and their role in the movement. Really important.
Well, let's talk about it real quick because we had an amazing example this week. I want to set up a piece of history and then bring us to the present moment quickly. So Phyllis Wheatley is someone in history that was one of the first important Black poets that we can find on record. There were many Black poets. Let me take that back. Aesop, for instance, let's just be real for people. Aesop was the son of a white king and an African-American woman who was enslaved. The story goes that a king had been imprisoned and he demanded that he have a woman with him and to show him some serious disrespect, they sent him an African woman who bore him a son who became Aesop, and Aesop gave you the famous Aesop fables. If you really dig in on that story, it's really interesting. Towards the end of his life, telling stories became life or death for him. He told some stories to get out of situations where he was about to die. So I don't want to go down the rabbit hole on that one, but I just want to say the power of our creativity and our art runs deep. And it has been more than just pretty pictures on a wall or pretty letters in a book. It has been, in some cases, for our freedom. Phyllis Wheatley rose to serious rank. She was captured in Senegal, Gambia, when she was 7 years old, brought to the United States, was very sick and frail. She was purchased or bought by a famous family of tailors in Boston. She rose from the ranks. She learned how to read everything from John Milton and Alexander Pope, the so-called classics of Greek and Latin works of like Virgil and Ovid and Terence and Homer. And she became celebrated globally for her works. All except for there was one person who really who was important, who really didn't like her.
Don't say TJ.
I'm going to say TJ. There was a sociopath rapist by the name of Thomas Jefferson. And this sociopath rapist named Thomas Jefferson said this about Phyllis Wheatley: misery is often the parent of the most affecting touches in poetry. Among the Blacks is misery enough, God knows, but no poetry. Love is the peculiar ostrom of the poet. Their love is ardent, but it kindles the senses only, not the imagination. Religion indeed has produced a Phyllis Wheatley, but it could not produce a poet. So this was the sociopath rapist Thomas Jefferson, who was saying basically that the abolitionists who were using Phyllis Wheatley's poetry as proof that there was intelligence within Black people, and for that reason they should be freed because they were real people. They weren't like lower animals. He completely was discounting her work. So what? Fast forward to this week, and we have this gorgeous example of Black brilliance that was on display at the inauguration of Joe Biden. The youth poet laureate, Amanda Gorman, made history. She became one of the youngest people to ever address a presidential inauguration. During the ceremony to swear in the new president, the 22-year-old Los Angeles resident delivered a speech called "The Hill We Climb." It was a speech that was half done on the night that there was an insurrection at the Capitol, and she finished it with inspiration from that particular event. Mm-hmm. It was a gorgeous speech. It was very well done, and it was 10 times more gorgeous or more well done when you consider the fact that she has had a lifelong struggle with a speech impediment, that she has struggled with a debilitating speech impediment, I should say, but she has never seen it as a disability. She's always seen it as a gift, and her gift was on display, widely celebrated. So from Phyllis Wheatley to Amanda Gorman, talk about justice, talk about full circle, coming full circle. Now, Sharif, before we jump in here, I just want to offer a couple of more examples just quickly. Do you have patience for me here?
Please.
Can I offer them? Okay, so I just want to tell you, these are not stories. These are just quick little tidbits of stories to help us get started talking about Black people who have creative minds, who became either artists or authors or creatives in one sort, what they saw as their contribution to freedom movements. And I want to make the case during this show with all of us together as a family that there can't be a revolution without these people. We need creative people to play their role, to do their part. So here's a couple of just examples I pulled. People in the family in the comments, please drop in famous artists that have had an impact on your life, please. And I don't care who you are, what your background is, and what the background of the artist is. If there are people who have had art that made an impact in your life, please drop it in the comments. I want to see what kind of list we come up with. During the Mississippi Freedom Summer of 1964, this is a little known story, Harry Belafonte and Sidney Poitier wanted to fund the movement in Mississippi for voter rights and for freedom. So they chartered an airplane. They flew in the middle of the night to Greenwood, Mississippi, and brought a suitcase full of cash. It was a suitcase with $60,000 that they were bringing to SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. When they landed, the Klan actually caught wind of the fact that they were coming and that they were bringing money. Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte are being chased through the dark night of Mississippi by Klans members in pickup trucks, chasing Cadillacs, as I understood it. That to me is just that could be a movie right there. Just so symbolic of the importance that Sidney, you have two Hollywood people who are saying to themselves, we're not Hollywood people. We are Black people with money, and there's a movement, and we're about to bring money to the movement right now. I thought that was amazing. Years ago, I think it was 25 years ago, probably 26, 27, even more, the filming of Malcolm X was coming to a halt because the studio was fighting Spike Lee on the length of the movie. I think they wanted it to be really shaved down to be about 2 hours long and to be some Disney-fied version of it. And he refused. He wanted the full story to be told. It was going to be 3 hours or more. So out of money and shut down by the white studio system, Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Prince, Janet Jackson, Oprah Winfrey, Tracy Chapman, Bill Cosby, they all pitched in money to help him complete that movie and get it done. And that's how we have a movie, Malcolm X. There's a school here in the Twin Cities called Harvest Prep Academy. It was started in the living room of Eric Mahmoud and his wife. The two of them had a daycare for Black children, and they were interested in closing Minneapolis's ridiculous achievement gap. And they wanted to do it with the Afrocentric foundation that they thought could give kids a fighting start. So they started a school, and at first it was a private school, eventually became a charter school. One day Eric is at work, a person shows up, a person brings him money out of the blue and just says, yeah, there's somebody who really likes the work you're doing and thinks your school needs to expand. And the person who really liked that was Prince. Wow. And Prince was widely known for either himself or sending somebody with a bag of money to nonprofits, right? To just like show up, here's a bag of money.
We need more of that in our world. We need more of that, you know. So
we need more of that today. Here's the final one I'll add, and then Sharif, I'll kick it to you and see if you want to add some on top of this, because this one is one of my favorites. I actually maybe 2 years or 3 years ago had just this great opportunity to go to a private meeting. It was very much an intellectual dinner at a house that had been built by Booker T. Washington's Tuskegee students. They built this house for the first president of Tuskegee, They built the bricks, they built the mortar, the land, they did everything. So everything was handmade by Tuskegee students. And there's a tree there with a bench underneath it. And that is where Martin Luther King wrote the great I Have a Dream speech. And he really sat on that bench and wrangled over it. And I sat on that same bench and I felt the power of history, coming through me, coursing through me. It was an amazing experience. But I did not know that he struggled with that speech. He struggled about what it was going to be. Should it be happy and aspirational? Should it be low key and just kind of like, straightforward? And he landed on a little bit of more low key and straightforward. And it was going to be about the bad check that America had written that had come due. Like Black people we've been given a bad check. In the middle of the speech, he was moved by the Spirit to go a different direction while he was talking, but he didn't have the final message from God on where that should be. And there was a person in the crowd near him who cried out, "Tell him about the dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream." And the person who yelled out, "Tell him about the dream," who was it, Sharif?
It was a woman's voice. But I can't. Was it Mahalia?
It was Mahalia Jackson, one of the world's most famous gospel singers of all time, who also happened to be somebody who would sing to Martin when he was in his most desperate times. He would reach out to her and she would soothe him with a song, a gospel song. And that, to me, is the power and the importance of creative people in our movement and in our lives. Thank you, family, for putting all your names here so far. I see who I see. We got in there. We said El Michelle says Nina Simone. Raquel Algren says Frida, who I had thought about. That's an interesting person. I thought about Frida in this too, because I wanted to. I don't know enough, but I knew she had a revolutionary bent. Picasso, Dali, Basquiat. Basquiat was a bad brother, just when it comes to like seeing the world so differently and remixing what he was seeing into art. That's Toya's also. Mama Toya's John Michael Basquiat. We've got another Nina Simone, Langston Hughes. Don't forget Grandma, Kehinde Wiley, Billie Holiday, Prince, Michael Jackson, Jay-Z. These are great, and they're still coming in. Kick it to you, Sharif El-Mekki. What do you think about this topic?
Yeah, I love the topic. The first thing, one of the quotes I have saved is by Amiri Baraka. And how he uses his art. But one of the things he said is the artist's role is to raise the consciousness of the people, to make them understand life, the world, and themselves more completely. That's how I see it. Otherwise, I don't know why you do it. So he's like, there's this sense of purpose. I love the Dr. King, Mahalia Jackson story. And I think, just in particular, I know we're talking about artists, but, just this, that particular speech and the role of two Black women played in it. One being Mahalia Jackson, encouraging him like, yo, we got your back. Let it go. She was like his hype man, in the stand. And then Prathia Hall, which is a lot of people don't know this, but the I Have a Dream, that phrase came from a young Black woman from Philadelphia.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, Prathia Hall. And so Dr. King heard her speak one day, and she was known, as a teenager, as a youth. I think she was in Spelman when he heard her, give this speech. Her father was a pastor, and so she was very accustomed to giving very lively, engaging, sermons. And so that, she was in her speech that he was attended. She spoke about, this dream and having a dream, and then she would keep talking about her dream and got permission to use it, and continue to use it. So I love the high, kind of like, got this phrase from, Prathia Hall and was like, oh, I want to incorporate that, from this young Black woman. And then an older Black woman in Mahalia, challenges him, supports him, encourages him to let loose, right? And so I think I love that, from both sides of it. Look, I'm not an artist. I come from, but a lot of folks in my family are artists, like I'm probably the only one that doesn't write poetry. My art was martial arts. That was about it,
That's an art.
It is, but
That's
not in the way that they were, like this more expressive piece. So I deeply appreciate the role in the movement. I saw it, with the Panthers, folks like Emory Douglas, right? For when I forget what his title was, but he was like, whatever his title was, it had to do with like communication and
minister was probably the minister of communication or something.
Okay,
right?
yeah, something like that. But it had this artistic bent, so he would design the art that was in the newspapers that the Black Panther Party would use for part of the political education that they would sell and all of that. So just really appreciated that. As a teacher, I would use political cartoons. I was a literature teacher, history teacher, but political cartoons was always a major part of our weekly theme, a weekly analysis, because part of the political education I'd want them to, engage in. And, I ended up being the leader for the Art and Music Academy at my school, right? And I'm like, I'm not an artist, but it allowed me to engage with artists, both art and music teachers, dance teachers inside the school, but also in the community. And so to be able to marry. So when we read Things Fall Apart with our 8th graders, of course we had my martial arts teacher come in and teach some of the drumming and cook some of the food, fufu and peanut stew and things like that. So they were, it's sculptors. And so it was great. I learned so much about, the art and the artists. And I got a few more a little later to share, but yeah, it's I'm glad we're talking about this and the connections.
One ways that this has always been important to me keeps coming up. You and I have had a little bit of conversation about the canon keeps coming up. Like the canon, who are the classics? Who are the classics?
Yeah.
Homer and Iliad and all these things. And I have, as an adult, I have a response to that always that's born in myself as a child. Because as a younger person, I was bored to death by many of the things that people asked me to read, like Moby Dick and stuff like that. I remember
Moby Dick's not that good.
There were people in my life who were just like, and when I say in my life, there were white people in my life who were devouring some books, and I would try and follow suit sometimes, like, oh, what was that about? Oh, that sounds good, blah, blah. And then I'd go read it, and it would just like bore me to tears, and I'd be done in like 20 pages, and then there were things like there was a book called Black Voices, which was an anthology of Black authors, and everybody had it around me. I can see the cover in my head. Everybody had it and read it, and it was my introduction to some things like, oh, I do like reading some things. I don't like reading that other stuff, but, and then, so the first time I had like an aha moment was James Baldwin. That was the first time. That was like being introduced to Michael Jackson. Like, it was like, I read that and I was like, I devoured it. And I was like, this dude is crazy. It was the eloquence of it. It was just how eloquent he was. And he would
eloquent and matter of fact about it. Like, aren't you all thinking like
super matter of fact?
Yeah, like just.
And he would write about brutal things and make them beautiful. Like his style of writing could make anything elegant, even though he's writing about seriously brutal, like racism and other isms and everything else. Did you have authors, for instance, that were that? They were like once you picked up their literature, it expanded your world, expanded your view of life.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. And it's so funny when you talk about like some of the, I was the same, like I would just devour everything, man. I would read the back of cereal boxes as I was eating. I would read the funnies. I would start with the funnies, then read the sports, then read the rest of the newspaper. I'd read comic book. Like I would read almost anything, but it was interesting how some of the folks who I would read, I'm like, why again are people excited about this book? Whether it was Moby Dick or Zen or Motorcycle Maintenance or the joint with the seagull, Jonathan the Seagull. Like there were some books I was just like, yo, why are y'all talking about this so much? But then there were others. Of course I would blank on her name right now. But the Watsons Go to Birmingham, that series all the way through The Land. My mother used to read that to our younger siblings. I would read them, like we would just keep passing it along. I enjoyed reading Alex Haley's books,
Mm-hmm.
Roots or Queen. If folks
The
haven't,
autobiography of Malcolm X was another one of those books. It was another one of those ones that changed my life, like reading it.
And I read that so many times. It was almost like that. There were like 3 or 4 books that I would read every single year, man, like all the time. Like it was just, oh yeah, I haven't read that in a while. I want to read it again. Like, and no, not for homework, not for anything, just my personal growth and development. One of them was Malcolm. The other one was Frederick Douglass' autobiography.
Did you get into Richard Wright?
Richard Wright, yes, but you know what, his story, like I would read it and also would share it, teach excerpts of it with my students. But some of it was just so, like Black Boy for me was like, it was just a brutal read. Like I mean, just to starting off where he almost sets the house on fire, and then the way he described like the consequence of that, like, man, like certain things that happen to kids, like it just breaks my heart. I can't even read it or watch it. Like, like it was just too, I was like, man. So I pushed through it. Like even some of Donald Gaines books, like I love it, but it's like, it's so tragic that I'm just like, I just don't want to read about. And I know it's life, but which is what they're interpreting and sharing. But it's also so gut wrenching, man. Like one of Donald Gaines books that our students was reading, so I would try to read it, and the child dies very early on, and I was just like, I was so heartbroken and like depressed about it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is too much. So
that gets kids though. I mean, if we think about, so the power that we're talking about is the power of art and creatives in the freedom movement, but the power of art outside of the freedom movement, like take Disney, for instance. If you look at most of the kids' things that Disney does, not most of, a large number of the kids' movies that come out of Disney have dead parents.
Yeah.
like your orphans, or your parents got, went away and never came back, or they died or something like that. And that hooks kids in,
I mean, because it's like, all right, what's the climax? Like they're going to come out of it, but how? But, sometimes I just like in the moment, I'm like, oh, this is, but yeah, like there were certain books I just had in constant rotation. And I just loved reading them. Every time I read them, I learned something different. I was a little older. I had even more context and background knowledge and understanding of the world and myself. And so it was always like a journey. Like when they describe reading as a journey, I often felt, exactly like that, and then I love the freedom movement part. Like that was very also specific, I read a quote somewhere. Somebody said the first weapon they banned, I'm talking about, enslaved African people, the first weapon they banned was our drums. And that just struck me. It's just like, like, what I mean? The voice, the sound, the message, the organizing, so I think they're still banned in some ways.
Still banned. I mean, they have found a way we found a way to bring it back, and then they found a way to commercialize it and profit off of it and control what gets said over the drums, which is why we have a whole bunch of ratchet hoochie songs. We don't have a whole bunch of freedom songs. Like we may have at one time. I loved it when my people, where it was customary that everybody had to listen to Bob Marley for a portion of their life, where it was customary that people like, well, I won't go deep down that rabbit hole, but we had a whole group of enlightened and music people too.
Well, they do now. It's just all samples. So they're like, you heard it.
That's true. Yeah, you heard it before. It's got all chopped up.
That tradition continues. It's just like you wouldn't know it's him.
So right now I'm doing a program, education program that I'm in right now, and one of the projects that I'm working on is a biomythology diorama, which is an electric version of a diorama. That is biomythology, which comes from Audre Lorde's book, where Nami, where she coined that term, which is basically a way of retelling your story so that it makes sense to your best self, right? Like you get to define your story, and it's part myth and it's part actual events, but the way that you tell it is in your own control. Right. And that's what a biomythology is. And as I was doing that, one part that I had to do in telling my story was trace my ancestral informants, what I called ancestral informants, which were people that contributed something to my thinking at different points in my life that became permanent in my life, right? So I never lost this thing here and there. And I'll tell you who's on my list of those things because it's germane for this conversation, and I'll see if any of them intersect with what you had. So on that list, I definitely had people like Booker T. Washington, Lucy Craft Laney, in the early years, in many earlier years. It also includes people like Bruce Lee and Prince and Jim Henson and Richard Pryor and Red Fox, George Clinton, right? It has all these people that are arranged like George Clinton and Bruce Lee couldn't be more different. But their philosophies match up at a certain point, like free your mind and your ass will follow. You can find a little bit of that in Coot Jean Do, which was from Bruce Lee, right? Richard Pryor had a searing intellect, right? I used to listen to Richard Pryor albums privately. I was partially allowed to listen to him. Like if I got caught listening to him, it wouldn't be a bad scene, but I knew I was personally not supposed to listen to him.
It was frowned upon.
It was frowned upon, but it was okay if I got caught. Red Fox is a different story. I really was not supposed to listen to Red Fox albums, but I listened to Red Fox albums and devoured them. They were like just...
I don't think I've ever heard a Red Fox thing outside of Stanford and Son. Like I think it was on A Black Hands where I realized that he had stand-up. It never occurred to me that he had stand-up. I always just saw him on TV shows.
He had a very he was actually friends with Malcolm X, by the way. He was friends with Malcolm X during the Big Red period, right? So him and Malcolm X, before Malcolm made his big transitions, was friends with and this is the type of crossover in our artists that we don't often talk about because we see them as entertainers only. And maybe that might be truer today than it was ever before. But Red Fox and Malcolm X were very close and shared ideas and shared thoughts, and they infiltrated each other's consciousness in very important ways. Richard Pryor had many influences that ended up in his stand-up and in his comedy, and then ended up in my ear and in my head. And his speech about not speech, but his bit about going to Africa and coming back, saying that he would never say nigger again, right? After he went to Africa, because he went to the motherland and saw lots of Black people and he didn't see a single nigger, right? That was a powerful turning point. I don't think people remember that was a shift in consciousness, for him and for everybody that listened to him. Right. Like, oh, damn, Richard Pryor, of all people, it was almost like he invented the word. Right. So anyways, who would be some of your ancestral informants, people who added a little piece to what you are today?
Yeah. We, in the Freedom School tradition, we call it like the intellectual genealogy. So I like the ancestral informants as well. I think the comedians weren't really on my, in my circle. I'm sure it never came up. I'm sure that those would have been banned. I was in school when I found out about, Richard Pryor, like for some of the older kids. I would say, Malcolm. And one of the things I enjoyed about reading about Malcolm was when he was, in Harlem or, Detroit, like he would talk about a lot of the artists who would come through Harlem. And so I think that, that piece was, always really stuck out. For me, it would have probably been a lot of the authors, folks who are writing things, folks who were, whether it was Langston Hughes, another book that was in my rotation that I shared before was Not Without Laughter. And so I would read that a lot. And that was, just Langston Hughes talking about family, dynamics and Black families trying to, go get through the struggle and different type of, like classism. How does that show up in families? How does, if you leave the house and you're all oppressed in different settings, how does that manifest itself when you come back to, to the circle? Mildred Taylor, I think Mildred Taylor is the name of the other author that, read all her books, and it was really, just always powerful. And I think some of the songs, like I remember Stevie Wonder and Bill Withers, like those were the two, like I can distinctly remember as a 4-year-old them being played on the weekends as, as everybody was cleaning the house or whatever like that. Those were the albums.
Saturday morning.
Yeah, Saturday morning.
You know what's a big important about that one? You just gave a very clear example. Stevie Wonder working on Happy Birthday for the King holiday was more than a song. It was more than a song. It moved people to want to fight for that to be a holiday.
Yeah. So those, absolutely. And then poets, like, and as I said, I didn't write poetry, but like Sonia Sanchez was really important. Her words, a lot of times people are like, oh, she's a contemporary Maya Angelou, but it was almost like she was always speaking where I think Maya Angelou, spoke to everybody, everybody like kind of, oh yeah, I recognize that. With Sonia Sanchez, it was like the revolutionaries was always had her poetry, always had her material as a part of their conversations, right? Nikki Giovanni, was another one.
Ooh,
right?
I forgot about Nikki Giovanni. Yeah, wow.
And listen, we used to do this joy when I was at principal at middle school. Every time we had a closing, we would have students perform. Sometimes it was with dance, sometimes it was just the art. But Ego Trippin' and Still I Rise by Maya, and they would read line by line, either dance or walk till they got to the middle, right? And so you had this, two expressive people, and using their words, and trying to help students internalize what that meant. Because that Ego Trippin', man, used to trip me out. I love that. It's one of my favorite one of my favorite poems, man. It's just like, it's so dope, so dope.
I didn't get poetry right away. It took me a while to develop.
I don't get all poetry. Let me be clear. I don't get all poetry. I'm like, yo, you just like make it plain, Malcolm said, but some of it is like, for me, it just really resonates. And I tell you, like, my favorite poet is probably Amir Suleiman. How he talks, how he uses words is just so powerful to me. But it's just there. I've always had like just dope poets around me, right? Like Yusuf Chroma is doing some amazing stuff internationally as well, and he was a student of mine, and so to watch him, Del P, who's a rapper, was a student of mine, and he's out there like doing great things, right? And so it's always that gift of word. And my sibling, my niece, was the Philadelphia's Youth Poet Laureate. So so I've always been surrounded. So if I didn't get it before, I definitely, got it from just being around some really great people. Yeah, she's a student at Shoemaker. Ended up she's at Penn now, Youth Poet Laureate for a year in Philly, and it was just just amazing stuff.
Music is one of those areas that, I mentioned Prince and Stevie Wonder, Bob Dylan. If you listen to them as more than music, there's times where you will catch a line here and there. You will go, damn, that explains our condition, or damn, you really put it like Big Tree, Small Axe is one of my favorite kind of like mental models from Bob Marley. So that song for me goes a long way. But to the extent that we have powerful art that that moves us to do to fight for our struggles and our freedom, I want to raise maybe a provocative issue with you and see what you think about it. Can it go the other way too? Right? Like powerful works of art that actually make us more ignorant. And you know what I'm going to ask about, but I'm just going to go ahead and leave it there for now. But
everything has a continuum, bro. Everything.
So it could go the other direction. So at a certain point in the 80s, yes, the 80s, I had moved from Oakland to Minnesota, right? And all of a sudden I'm listening to something and it pops up and it sounds like my homies in the Bay Area, right? It sounds like it sounds like, and it talks like, and there is nothing in mainstream music that sounds like it, because mainstream music at that point is mainstream. It's like it at this point it's like what's Al B. Sure. Al B. Sure was popping at this moment, right? Like that day and night, right?
Yeah.
And then on this other station, as a matter of fact, let me take it back. It's not even on radio. It's damn near bootleg. you got NWA popping up.
Hmm.
And I'm fascinated. I'm like, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard. This is real people, street people, finally getting their due.
So you heard Albie Shore and George Michael, because I think they were like
They
hot
were
at the
definitely
same
in that
time,
same
right?
minute. Yes.
And the next thing you hear is NWA.
I mean, at this time, radio is Michael Jackson, Albie Shore, you know, I think Color Me Bad and all that type of stuff. That's radio. Radio is not doing Ice Cube at this moment. Nothing even close to it, right? This is almost bootleggy, right?
Yeah. I mean, even
but it sounded like
said
the
that they weren't
streets.
playing them on the radio. So
They
like,
would PE. I can remember the first time being in Berkeley in a record store in Berkeley, hearing PE for the first time, thinking, I've never heard anything like this before in my life. Now, you just gave a great example. That's perfect. So on one hand, I'm fascinated with NWA because it sounds like the people of the streets. But when I go back and try and listen to that as a grown ass man, first of all, my kids walk through the room. I'm not playing that ever, right? I'm just like, what the hell was I thinking? Like, this is really some bullshit, right? But I thought it was amazing at the time. You know, maybe F the Police is probably, if F the Police was a poem, it'd probably be one of the most powerful poems. It should be a movement song. That's their one movement song. Maybe Express Yourself is another one of their movement songs. But PE, when I first heard it, there has never been another PE, right? And another Public Enemy. Fight the Power and songs like that and 911's a Joke and Burn Hollywood Burn. All of those songs.
By the time I get to Arizona, don't
by
trust
the time I get
it.
to don't trust it. Yes.
Yeah.
Channel Zero, right? All of those songs could have been powerful works of art on their own, right? Not a hip hop song.
Yeah.
Am I making too much? Am I going to go into dangerous old person territory if I keep talking about this hip hop thing? You know, like,
listen, sometimes, you know, the old person territory, I think is reserved for the elders sometimes to be able to give critical analysis of like, hey, this is I mean, I'm with you. Like the song that got constant replay, you know, with me during that time. And I think I was a freshman in college during that time. And I remember they used to give out citations. The school I went to gave citations if you played F the Police too loud and somebody complained.
What?
So I had this raggedy tape cassette player in my dorm in Gordon Hall, and these jokers would call the campus police on me every time I played the song. So what did that make me do? Play the song even more. Right. And so then eventually I probably had 20 citations. And what I would do is I would just tape them over my wall and just to let them know I don't care. You know, I moved off campus after that. But, you know, for my sophomore year. But, you know, like that was the song. Like it spoke to me. And it was, you know, it was like that in rotation with KRS-One and Public Enemy, of course, which had a ton of things. Right. NWA was like, this song or that song.
This is where the old person in me will come out, though, right? So KRS-One definitely is in that same group. Public Enemy, Chuck D, in terms of poetry and relating a tale that we need to hear. KRS-One was very much on Malcolm X stuff in a venue that didn't have a lot of that. I don't know if you remember Paris, the rapper Paris. The rapper Paris, very much a child of the Black Panthers movement. Okay. So a lot of his early albums had the Black Panther kind of typography and everything in it. I'm sorry, bro. We don't have that anymore. What we got right now is, you know, and I'm not going to go too far down this, but the only reason I'm going to say this is because art and creatives have the power to move us to want to free ourselves and liberate ourselves. And it also has the power to re-enslave us.
Dead in your senses.
Dead in your senses. Some of the hyper-sexualized, hyper-individualized, I don't care about nobody. I don't give a damn about you. It's just about money and you know what's like, you know, calling women out their name and creating a culture of me, a culture of money, a culture of material possessions, consumership, anti-consciousness. Like, so when you have a Lil Wayne say to the reporter, "Why are you asking me about Black Lives Matter? That don't have nothing to do with me. Racism is over." Like, I look out in my crowds, I see white people. I don't know why you would ask me about, Black Lives Matter. That has nothing to do with me.
He got a pardon for saying that.
Okay, so there is that. So maybe he is using his intellect because
listen, I 100%. And I think there's, with art, it becomes to the point, like there's certain art, like I would not listen to, with my parents or my grandparents, right? So at some point I lived with my great grandmother. There was certain art I would never, ever even think about, playing in front of her or watching in front of her, right? So like that's, but it's still, it still may have been appealing to me in some kind of way, right? And so I think that's a part of it. I think, I disagree with the whole argument that art has no influence, right? Like you get people that talk about like, oh, art inspires, it does this. And then the other side, we're like, hey, the argument that you're making is like, hey, it can have detrimental effect if they're pumping, poison in people's ears. They're like, no, that doesn't happen. Like that doesn't, like, I'm just like, my whole thing is like, let's be more critical, about how we talk about it, how we think about it, and what we say. Like, let's not lie, that it doesn't have influence, right? My thing is about the hypocrisy. Like people would say, oh, violence in rap, but have no problem bankrolling a Hollywood movie where 50 people getting gunned down. Like that was always my thing. Like that's celebrated. Look at this beautiful art, and he just is cocaine and machine guns and machetes and everything, and that's art. Oh, don't worry about it. Nobody takes that literally. Nobody's in it. But then as soon as someone puts it to a beat, and they're from a different culture background, black or brown, then it's like, oh my gosh, look at you, you're destroying the whole country. Oh my gosh.
Yep. If you're making money off of that person, then it's great.
Then they're just silent. They're just silent. Man, those people, you're gonna hear them. They're not arguing about that. Probably.
As a teacher and as an educator, do you think like when I say some of this is garbage rap and it's teaching our kids all the wrong things, it's teaching them misogyny, it's teaching them how to break up families and familial connections with each other, it's antisocial in ways that are really damaging to a movement. If you wanted a movement of people who can work together collectively for a common purpose to free themselves, having large streams of art that tells them be about yourself, kill other people if they get in your way, take their money, rape their women, blah, blah, blah. It's almost like the message that the devil would want to put in you if the goal was to stop you from ever becoming dangerous for real, right? Mm-hmm. But as an educator, as I say that as a parent, not an educator, whatnot, do you think that there's a possibility that you take those exact same pieces of work that I find to be anti-social and anti-revolutionary and you break them apart with kids? Like you use them as a teaching tool and say like, okay, y'all listen to this anyways, so let's go line by line in it, or let's pull it apart. Now, when I've tried to do this, the lines are so stupid that they're more stupid when I read them. Like when I hear them, the music.
A lot of the kids will say, like, "Listen, I listen to the beat. Their lyrical, the lyrical analysis is unnecessary. Like the beat is catchy and what
they're saying is stupid."
Yeah. So I've heard a lot of kids say that, and I think
there might be a way to ask them, like, what do you think? What does this tell you about this person, where they come from socially, and what's going on in their life, and why is it important for them to express it this way? Maybe there is ways to use it as a teaching tool.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of times, but my thing is always like, what is the best teaching tool? Like you can almost turn anything into a teaching tool, but what's the optimal level? What's the highest level? Like I think that's what we're as educators, that's what we'd be striving for, and so when we're looking at analysis, I think it goes back to like a little bit what we talked about, last week or the week before, where it's like, what's the overarching question? And then once you determine that, then you can kind of really see like, okay, which artist is best at using this? Which artist is best at teaching this or communicating this? Zach Wright, he used to do, and I don't remember all of it, but he would frequently try to bring in hip hop, but more in an analysis way. I remember he had some article that talked about the different, the sophistication of the lyrics, like how many words or what's the levels of vocabulary that different rappers use. And he would share that with students, and students would dive into that. But it was always a purpose. It was always like, what am I trying to, if I'm trying to push them to be more diverse in their vocabulary, and then I share, hey, like, here's your favorite rappers. Now, this person that you love, they're rapping on the second grade level. Their complexities of their sentences and the cadence is X compared to this one over here, right? And so students would analyze that and critique that in different ways. And I'd have to ask him to, remind me of some of the other ways that he used it. But I do think there are some, you got to, like anything else, you got to select the content that you're doing. So if you're doing something on communication or vocabulary or syntax, like semantic, whatever it is, persuasion, whatever it is, you can decide like, okay, this is, and students can determine it. Like, is this at the highest level or lowest level? Which one is more effective at communicating this particular point, and why? Right? Like, and that's the thing. But I mean, me, when I was a teacher, if we were analyzing anything or if students were analyzing quotes, it was from who I regarded the best. And we still had time and fun to debate some of the other stuff, because they didn't understand why I loved KRS-One and Public Enemy back in the 90s when I had students. They were already listening to some other folks who I don't remember who they were. But I was like, what's the matter with y'all? Who's your parents? I want to meet them.
Who's your parents?
Yeah. I want to have a meeting about my grades. No, about your musical choice.
This is something I had forgotten about as you were talking. I looked it up. There was a scientific analysis that basically said that hip hop, of all the music genres, had the highest vocabulary size. And if you think about it, I see, my son is in the comments trolling me as usual whenever this comes up. But good.
That's like a good son should.
Whatever. So he mentions Black Thought. I don't know if people have ever heard of Blackalicious. Blackalicious has a song where they do they rap the alphabet, and the amount that they pack in, the amount of technical skill and words and vocabulary that they pack into one song is ridiculous. It's like crazy. You could never be that person without having immense talent. So I can't, wipe away any of it. I don't know how many people are listening to Blackalicious like I do, or Black Thought, as much as they are like a Lil Wayne.
Wait a minute. So, if you're not listening to Black Thought, like, I need to talk to your parents too. I don't care how
you want their musical choice. You want to see what their musical choices are. The other thing that when I just pulled this up, it said it has listed the rappers' vocabulary. They've rated them. They've studied them by size. So it tells you who's on top or who's on bottom. So anyways, not to do the old man thing, but to say that I do believe that hip hop is a powerful medium, a very, very, very powerful medium, of which the lyrics can have a outsized kind of impact for good or for bad. I like what you said when you said anything can be used as a teaching tool, though. Right. I remember. And so when I tell you about my ancestral informants, there's different things that they've said at different times. I met George Clinton once and we had a conversation. I will tell you about that later, because my girlfriend of the moment became his girlfriend of the moment when I met George Clinton. But so I have some hard feelings about
sound like another show. But
yeah, there's another show, but I have some hard feelings about this. One of the things that he said right before he went on in that is that I'll never forget. It was like, people say I use bad words, and there's no such thing as bad words because all words is good. And I remember thinking to myself, that's some bullshit, as I'm cussing to myself. And it hit me later, just knowing so much about his lyrical content and where he was going with things, he was about breaking all the boundaries. Never being a slave to another person's typography, always thinking outside of the lines and not letting people tell you how to value things, like to value them for good or bad. So the entire Parliament Funkadelic universe has a theology to it of sorts that people don't really talk about it, because You're just too busy, like really jamming out to the music or whatnot. But there's an intelligence behind it. There's an intelligent life form. When I was in fourth grade or fifth grade, I think it was fifth grade when One Nation Under a Groove was out. If any of my teachers had ever used One Nation Under a Groove, everybody on my bus who was listening to it on the way to school every morning would have piped up in class, right? But I'll give you a different story. My wife, I've told my wife this story a lot. In fourth grade, I think it was, I had a teacher who was just like, I want to share something with you guys today. It's very important. And it has so much meaning and purpose. We're going to study it. She passed out these lyric sheets that had been run off on one of them things that you used to turn or whatnot.
Purple John.
Yeah. So we get that with all the ink on our hands or whatnot. She rolls in a cart, and on a cart, there's a 45 on a record player. She starts playing it. And we look around and like each other, like, what the hell is this? Bro, it was Debbie Boone. You Light Up My Life. Yeah. Let's see how'd that go. You do not want me to show you how that went. But talk about like so I maybe got a little something out of it because she made us memorize all the words. We had to sing it, blah blah. But in the back of my mind, my young person mind, I'm thinking school is bullshit, is what I'm thinking at that moment. If anybody had ever used One Nation Under a Groove or Rapper's Delight or any of these other cultural artifacts that were already part of our world fund of information, they could have probably taught us a lot better.
Yeah, man. That makes me think. It brings up super fond memories. I have no idea who the artist was that your teacher brought out to you, but I think that kind of scenario gets probably played out a whole lot. But, I talk about Nithamu Sasa a lot because it was just, such a grounding force. And here I am, at the 50-year mark. And still, like I can say that is fundamentally one of the most important decisions my mother ever made was enrolling us in Nithamu Sasa. But one of the things we had, and I was a part of, was the Freedom Now Choir. And when you talk about like art and songs, like we would memorize, in freedom schools now, we talk about chants and cheers. We had these liberation songs that, a lot of folks, in freedom schools and other movements, independent Black schools were using and singing. And some of those we still remember. Like the other day was Patrice Lumumba's birthday. And I texted my classmates like, didn't we used to sing a song about Patrice Lumumba? And they're like, no, that song was about Kwame Nkrumah, like you probably just the lyric, you know what I mean? So it was like, I just remember, just singing all of these different songs about Malcolm, about Martin, about consciousness. So you imagine a 5-year-old, 6-year-old singing songs like, I went to a meeting one night and that feeling just wasn't right. You see, I thought that stuff about Blackness just wasn't for me. But when I found out it was for me, I joined in the unity. And now I'm down for the fight for liberation. Like those are the songs that I remember as a kid. And we had like just dozens of them that we would sing at different moments.
It's funny. I'm going to say this about that song. First of all, somebody watching this is going to memify you.
Please don't do that.
They're going to take that.
Y'all crew, all that burning sanders. My wife up there putting them in front of my house and all that. Like, get that joker off the screen.
I will say this about that song. The underneath of that song sounds like I'm on the battlefield for my Lord.
Yeah, but that was the thing. A lot of them, like so, Malcolm X was a friend of mine. See,
it's about to become me
about nation time. We were older when we realized, like, hey, that's the Cisco Kid. You know what I mean? So a lot of the songs were like, they had different tunes and they would change them. And you see that a lot. You see religious, like churches and religious singers might change a theme of song or vice versa, right? But they were using like just the art to say like, hey, here's a way to engage and educate, right? Like, and my main point is like, how educators use creativity to use the arts to amplify what their message is and what the focus and theme of that school or classroom is. And for us, it was about liberatory movements, right? So when we sang songs about Kwame Nkrumah or Malcolm or Martin, it was about liberation, even if they changed, took a tune or beat or cadence and substituted it for something else.
This is for the theme of this show. I mean, this is really important. You can have young people visualize freedom by what you put before them, the songs they sing, the things that they do or whatnot. When Dr. Fuller says that education should prepare kids for the practice of freedom, and he's talking about Paulo Freire's vision of that for education, the songs that they sing, the poems that they recite,
right,
the stuff that you do could either help you along those ways, they could harm you, or they could just be neutral. And I know, like, depending on the type of school you go to, a lot of it is fluff. It is not revolution songs or whatnot. I am happy when I talk about my ancestral informants. They come from my dad, from my mom, from their friends and neighbors and my uncles and aunts. What they played around me, what they showed around me, told me was important in life. For my dad, he was a massively intelligent individual who was very much into all the things the right things that I'm thinking now that gave me an orientation early in life about freedom, about struggle or whatnot. And there were little things that I picked up and I took along with me. He was very into jazz. So there was some jazz stuff that I just heard that stuck with me. But the Stevie Wonder Master Blaster album, I can still remember to this day him getting it the first day. I can remember listening to it back and forth. I can remember pulling out the lyric sheets and reading the lyrics. And the lyrics were deep, but it was funky. And it was amazing. It was like it was everything. That's not a nursery rhyme, right? That album Master Blaster had some stuff on it. And then he was listening to Marvin Gaye's What's Happening album, which I was catching some of the meaning, and as I got older and I would hear the songs more and more, I would get more of the meaning.
More meaning, yeah.
It would have more meaning. In the beginning, I was like, "Why is he listening to this all the time?" Right? Like,
That's like the Message, right? Like we were kids when the Message came out, and as it got, I was just like, and I was, for a lot of that, I would read about it, but I didn't necessarily experience it, or we would see it, if we visited relatives, but it wasn't necessarily in my house, or, right? And so, like, as I got older, more sophisticated, it was just like rereading a book, re-listening to a song touched you in different ways, and you just like expand it, right? And so, like, how I would hear The Last Poets as a child, and how I can hear and pick up on, what's said, but also what's not said, what's implied and what's in between the lines, like in the multiple meanings of their, and how they are just a foundational group for so many people. Like all of that, I think, just plays out. And I saw, and even in Iran, like I saw like how they used art, like even for them, like stamps was an art. Like I told you, the first Malcolm X stamp I ever saw in my life was in Iran with Malcolm X.
Wow.
So, this was in the early 80s, America got one later, probably because they're like, what?
I didn't even know. Did we get one?
Yeah, there's a Malcolm X stamp. I don't remember when it was published, but yeah,
it must be in the bottom drawer.
You gotta ask for it. You gotta ask for it. Like, and many post office might say, "Come back later." We'll try to get one. But in Philly, like you can ask for it. I don't know when it was published, but first one I saw, and it was art. It was beautiful. It had many colors on it. It was like they looked at those kind of things as messages, and where people would say like, hey, that's propaganda, and they would say, hey, you use propaganda all the time, right? Like, but just this idea of using art pervasively, murals, like us in Iran, like murals are like everywhere. Philly is like number one in the country with murals, right? And like what they call street art or graffiti art or whatever, like how are people delivering messages? What are their messages, and how do they try to communicate it? And then how does it get mainstreamed, right? Like, and so like, hey, graffiti art now, like you can see that in commercials now, where before it was like, that's the easy way to get locked up or hit upside the head with a billy club, So,
bro, I'm like getting tired of these commercials for medications that have all my favorite songs in them. I'm like, I am not that old yet. Right? Y'all can't be doing.
Listen,
you can't be doing this song.
It's a science behind it. They try to send you a message like, if this song relates to you, then it's time.
They're all like shingles, and it'll be like, the Earth, Wind, and Fire singing something like about shingles, and I'm like, what the hell? I am not that old. I'm sorry. I'm gonna fall out if I ever see Little Red Corvette or something like that pop up in a asthma or COPD commercial. But
keep living, bro. You probably will.
I know. Keep living. Well, listen. Here's why I will end on this, because you made a couple of points that I think resonate with me in my final analysis. Number one, I will say a negative point, which is the last point that you just ended on around the commercialization of our art. And how it can be used beyond us and commercialized and created into a commodity. Street art, all of that type of stuff now is a global business. Hip hop now is a global business. Things that came out of the Black experience to explain the Black experience to Black people eventually became a thing that was modified by Warner Brothers and others to be the white version of the Black experience, the white entertainment of the Black experience, the Blaxploitation of the Black experience for commercial gain, for commercial profit, and globalization, right? To sell it to the entire world. And it is possible for you to get on a plane and go to Tokyo or to a place in Africa and find the worst portrayals of African Americans in their hands or on their shirts because of Warner Brothers taking over and commodifying what once was a Black art form, still is a Black art form. So that for me is, oh, hell no. Michelle Johnson says international lover in a Viagra commercial. See, oh, hell no. You gonna leave me alone here, Michelle Johnson. So the positive, that's a negative thing that I was gonna say. The positive thing that I'll just say is this, is people like Killer Mike today is using his platform and his art form to move people to form a Black bank. Jesse Williams, who's an actor who has been on some of the best Emmy award-winning shows or whatnot, is using his platform and his fame and his artistry to do what Harry Belafonte did. Denzel Washington actually gives money in ways in which he never seeks credit for, but he has developed other artists who are now in the game and doing well because he paid their tuition to college. Bill Cosby, who is, listen, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but Bill is actually one of the biggest donors to HBCUs that there ever was. And also his shows in the 90s actually created a generation of Black people who dreamed and thought differently because they saw Denise Huxtable at Hillman College, right? So for me to pretend like there was this time way back when there were great examples and there aren't anymore just isn't true. Sean Puffy Combs funding charter schools and doing the Rev TV thing where he brings people of different political backgrounds together. Revolt TV.
Revolt TV is his.
Yeah, so Revolt TV, and he did this, he's done this series around, like, especially running up to the election. He's done this multiple times around voting and around democracy and getting people involved. And these are artists who have a platform, who have been made famous, have money, and they're using it for the freedom. They're using it for the movement towards freedom of Black people. Lil Wayne, who I give, a hard time or whatnot. Lil Wayne is giving lots of money back to the city of New Orleans, right? Little be told. As a matter of fact, they've turned down some of his money. Lil Wayne wanted to build a skate park for kids in New Orleans because there wasn't one, and he travels other places and he sees kids of other races, enjoying these skate parks, and he was going to build one, apparently, as the story goes, in New Orleans, and they didn't want to take his money because they thought it was inappropriate given where it was coming from, type of thing. Right. So even in the situations where we're dissing people, they are attempting to give back. Nipsey Hussle, in his death is another one where it's uncovered just how much of a philosophy he had for rebuilding the block, rebuilding the places where he lived and came from. So that's my bottom line. I think art and artists and people. Amanda Gorman was a gorgeous, brilliant example of the word, and how giving the word in a place can move a nation and move everybody. So Thomas Jefferson, you're a jackass and you can shut up. I hope you stay dead. So what you said about Phyllis Wheatley was completely undone by Amanda Gorman at the inauguration this week. That was full circle for me of a story and a completion of a story. And that's all I got. What about you, brother? What say you?
Yeah. We may wish he stayed dead, but he's very much alive in our institutions. So very, very much alive. His spirit or his ghost, or however you want to describe it, is what's holding some of these pillars in the cementing the foundation of this this racist these institutions and stuff. So, my last thought is one, just like Amanda Gorton. There are many Amanda Gortons out there. One of the things that the vice president said was that she may be the first woman in her role, but she won't be the last. What I thought she was about to say was, I'm the first woman, but I'm not the first one to deserve to be here. I'm not the first woman who deserved to be there. There are plenty of folks. And I think the same thing with poets like Amanda Gorton. Like, she may be the youngest, but she ain't the first one who deserves this attention, these accolades, this inspiration, where so many teachers were running to their laptops to say, like, oh, how am I going to create a lesson about this? Like, that should always be the energy, bring that, as Ray loved to say, bring that same energy, or the energy that we're on. Like, we should always be on that type of energy where you can take really dope content and, okay, how am I going to use this to challenge the thinking? Right. It's not just for entertainment value. I want to close. I started with Amiri Baraka, and I want to also, use it for my, some of my closing statements. But he has a very brief, call to people for more Black artists, where he says, particularly poems, but he says, we want a Black poem and a Black world. Let the world be a Black poem, and let all Black people speak this poem, silently or loud. So shout out to all the poets and artists that I just have, personal relationships, whether it's Tyson Amir on the West Coast, Amir Suleiman, Dr. Sonia Sanchez, Del P, my niece Husna Hashim, Youth Poet Laureate from a couple years ago, DJ Miz, another one of those Nathan Musasa classmates, Malik B from the Roots, God rest his soul. And Felicia Hodges was one of the things I used to try to do, was if they made art, I would try to purchase it. Not every thing they drew, but like Felicia Hodges is an example of a student. She ended up going to University of Vermont on scholarship for art. And I remember purchasing one of her pieces of work, and just tried to do that as a way to support, but also just acknowledging her brilliance. It's just like, yo, this should be public. Like, people should see this. We purchase it so we can put it on the wall. And so I would just, my final statement, encourage folks, please support our youth artists. We spoke last week about mentorship or sponsoring. Please sponsor young Black artists.
That means open your goddamn wallet. Yeah. That's what that means. Is, I'm mentoring this artist. Really? Did you give him any money? No. Well, you ain't mentoring nobody. You need to sponsor that artist, because nothing sponsors an artist like them having resources to be able to continue to do their art. The starving artist thing, there shouldn't be no such thing in a society called a starving artist. So.
Just if the mumble rappers starve a little bit, I don't want anybody to starve, but let them, if they're hungry, let them be hungry. But,
take the money out of that.
But as far as the other artists, the ones who are doing great work, and particularly the youth, support them, encourage them. This is absolutely vital to, it's part of our lifeline to express.
You made me think of one last thing as we go. This show, Unpublic, the rebrand of this, I wanted this to be more about brilliance. I wanted it to be more about success, and to study less our failure. So in education, we talk so much about the achievement gap and all the gaps and whatever. The gap I want to close is the belief gap, and I want to do it with examples of people overcoming. And many of the people that we talked about in this show today are people who've overcome something and became great, and they became creative, and they became known. We have a class of Black creators today that are on some new stuff that we never talk about. YouTube is a great example of finding Black creatives who are doing things. Marquez Brownlee is somebody I talk about often, who has a tech channel with millions of viewers now, who has interviewed everybody from Bill Gates to Elon Musk or whatnot. He started in his bedroom as a 16-year-old doing small videos on his video, on his cameras, on his cell phones and stuff, just talking about him. 10 years later, he's a millionaire. So he started this as 16 as a black kid in a room. And if you watch his videos from 16 to 26, the background starts changing because he goes to college at some point for engineering, and he keeps making the videos. And then after college, he sets up his own shop, and now he owns an entire studio in New Jersey, drives a Tesla, and does tech stuff, not even black tech stuff every day. His story needs to be heard. What made you think that you could like turn this into something that nobody had ever seen before?
The audacity of it all. The black
audacity. Our brother Charles Cole sent us a link to the masterclass done by Kev on Stage, who's a Christian comedian, and he's breaking down his creative philosophy in that. Issa Rae, I'm about to buy her masterclass. Issa Rae is somebody who was on YouTube with the Awkward Black Girl series, and eventually look at her now, right? She's writing award-winning, amazing series with Black people at the center of it. So new class of Black creatives coming down the pipe. So let's not sound like, oh man, I see somebody in Twitter said these old heads talking about hip hop or something. So
no, and it's every, like Mama Toya, we can't forget about like the physical art, whether it's sculptures, right? We interviewed Mama Fasaha last year in 2020, and she talked about the art on the cover of They Carried Us book, right? Like, and so this is a famous Black sculptor. There are youth amongst us who are doing that, Mama Toya, whether it's sewing, crocheting, clothing lines. Like I have so many, because I think about, I have so many students from the 3 schools that I worked at that are designers, designing clothes, who are artists, who are musicians. It's an amazing number of them. And I was just like, and I always think like, man, our school could have done a lot better in supporting the creatives, right? We had opportunities here and there. Like we were grateful to partner with Mural Arts. Our students were involved with so many of the murals, some of the dopest murals in the city. Our students were participating in it. Our brother and the families who do the poetry movements in Philly, Philadelphia Youth Poetry Movement, was just kind of started at SLA. And then just grew. I think that's how it started. I don't want to, misquote if that's wrong, but, started there, but it just blew up. And then, I think that Brave New Voices is a national competition with all these, spoken word artists that are just talk about like I may not have gotten some of the poetry, but when you listen to that spoken word art, like it just hits you at so many and it's especially when it's from the youth. When they're talking about their experiences or how they're challenging the system, man, it's powerful, beautiful. Like I left many of those, spaces teary-eyed and fired up,
Well, I hope people leave this show teary-eyed and fired up and ready to go.
That's the best way to leave.
So for my family watching this, thank y'all for your wonderful, beautiful comments today. Been looking at some of them. We'll go through them after the show and add a note here or two. Love the list of people that you said were your ancestral informants, the people that were in your life that were creative people that left a mark, that left something in your mind that still stands today. I appreciate that. Hopefully we're doing that with some of this work, that we drop little things into your life, into your mind that give you life and help you survive the week in a world where it's not meant for you to survive. This has been another Freedom Friday. You are still not free, but hopefully after this hour with us, you're just a little bit freer. You can make it through this weekend. God bless America for making a change. I'm not saying we're on the other side of the mountain. I'm not saying that we have made it to the promised land. What I am saying is we are not in the same swamp we were just a few days ago and a year ago. So
That's so important. So
Yeah.
important. The
So
strange
peace.
fruit may look different, but there's still a lot of strange fruit
See, you're
out
gonna
here.
do that at the end. See,
I'm
you just
sorry.
gonna
All
bring
right, that's
something
it.
up.
Let's
Now
close
let me
it
say at
out.
the end. I'm gonna close out, but now I'm gonna say I meant to mention Billie Holiday's. The very first protest song is "Strange Fruit." The very first. I shouldn't say protest song of the civil rights movement. "Strange Fruit" was the seminal popular culture work that gave a brutal vision of what was being fought for and what was being fought. Billie Holiday cannot be missed in this lineup of everything that we talked about today. So, anyways, I am going to close us out now.
I think she's a great person to close it out on. Yeah.
She is. So go listen to that right now and get inspired. Love y'all. Have a great weekend, and we will see you next week.